Hello everybody, it's James here and it's Ask Dutch Anything episode something. I've not written the number down. It could be 50. It might be 49. Let's call it 50. I think it might be 50. Anyway, so I've got to rush off in an hour exactly, so it's going to be an hour exactly this show. Let me do the intro very, very quickly. Pro Wrestling Tees, go there, support the show, buy a t-shirt. Facebook, Storytime with Dutch Mantell, links are in the description with this and everything else. I'm going to say merchandise as well. I've got 2 books, one on Owen, Hart, one on The Rock. Links are in the description. Amazon, Dutch has got 2 books as well, The World According to Dutch and Tales from a Dirt Road. If you want them signed, you can actually email dirtydutchmantell with 2 L's at gmail.com. You can also get your diplomas signed. You can also get hats signed. I have a new show. It's not that new. It's been 6 weeks now, 5 weeks. Stevie Richards show. It's doing very, very well on YouTube. Please subscribe. Check it out. And email, the most important one is questions for dutch@gmail.com to submit your questions for this show. Let's go to a follow-up from last week, Dutch. Nick Butcher. He's the guy who wrote in and said, you were being considered to be brought into WWE in 2007. And I said, email back in. Tell us where you heard about this. Because you didn't know, Dutch, and I didn't know. Here's what he says. I'm so happy you read my email out last week. I was friends with someone who claimed he worked for WWE. He said he was a talent scout looking for UK-based wrestlers, and Hade Vanson, not Vade Hansen, we got that mixed up, was one of the guys he had signed. He showed me an email sent to Hade that stated he was going to be signed by WWE to appear in a faction with Kane, Brian Lee as Abel, Ron and Don Harris as Jacob and Eli Blue, and they would be assisted by Wayne Cowan, a.k.a. Dutch Mantell. Mr. Cowan would be known as Uncle Zebekai, who would be the ringside manager for the group. So apparently that's where he heard it from, someone who claimed he was a WWE talent scout.
I have never heard of anything like this before. Now, where he got this information, I don't know. But he says the guy claimed to work for WWE. Did he know he worked for WWE, or was he just talking? And if he was just talking, why would he bring up that idea? That idea was like way down here on the totem pole, and I never heard of it. But they did bring in Ron and Don as Jacob and Eli.
Yeah, but that was in the mid-90s. I mean, that was ages ago.
So when is this supposed to happen?
2008.
No.
You were TNA at the time. You were still writing for them.
Yeah, Ron and Don were out of the business by then. And so was Brian Lee.
Brian Lee had disappeared. No one could find him for years and years and years.
Yeah. Well, I know where he is.
Where is he?
But I can't tell you.
Okay.
Secret. No, he's in Florida.
Oh, right. So he's not in Ring of Honor.
No, he's from Florida. So he just went home, and the wrestling business wasn't very good to Brian, really, because after he did that deal with Taker, you know, he told me what he made for that match with Taker, and I went, what? I couldn't believe his payoff. I forgot.
Low or?
It was horrible, really. He's in the same match as Taker, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what Taker got, but I guarantee you Taker didn't get what Brian Lee got. I think he got I forget. Thinking about it in its totality, and Brian Lee wasn't a big star, but for that pay-per-view and the house, I think he got a 10 grand. Now that's big money back, and especially for Brian, it was big money, but he wasn't paid I think he just got paid off the house, to tell you the truth. So, but probably Taker got 50 or 75, and Brian got 10. Now, granted, it's a gimme for Brian, and I think they were thinking about even taking him out of that match before he did it. And Vince thought twice about it because I think he'd failed some test or something about something. And I think he was let go not long after that. But I never heard that idea about Brian Lee and the Harris boys and me and all in a big group. Never heard about it at all. And the timeline doesn't fit.
I'm trying to look. So apparently he wrestled in 2014 a few times. And then before that, the last time he wrestled was in 2006.
Who's this?
Brian Lee. He was briefly in TNA, but he left before you got there as a full-time writer. I'm just looking what else he did.
No, I was there when he was supposed to come in. This was like their first one or second show or something like that. And then they booked him and he just didn't show up.
Did you ever find out why?
No, it's Brian, so you can't run him down.
I'm just trying to look for Brian's WWF shows. His last one was SummerSlam 94, The Undertaker versus the Underfaker. And he had a few matches on WWF TV while he was appearing as Brian Lee in Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
I didn't know that either. I brought him to Puerto Rico one time. I picked him up at the airport and I took him to his room and I said, I'll be back in 3 hours and we'll go to the town that night. I came back in 3 hours. Guess what? Couldn't find him. He wasn't there. And then the next day was a Saturday. So I lived in that area anyway. So I went and knocked on his door and he opened the door and I says, brother, you're alive. He said, yeah. I said, where were you? He said, oh, I was here. I said, no, you weren't. I said, I knocked on this door for 10 minutes yesterday and you never answered. But what he was he was out at the drugstore loading up. And what he did, he got messed up and he just passed out. And I may have been knocking on the door and he could have been in the room, but he didn't answer it. So, and then when he left, he said, will I get paid for Friday? I said, well, I highly doubt it since you didn't make it. So, and he said, well, I'm going to lose money. I said, well, I give you the shot to come down here, but no, you're going to screw me too. Okay. And I let him finish up his 2 shots and I never booked him again. And I like Brian, but hey, when you give your word, somebody books you, make the shot. You're obligated to make the appearance, and he didn't do it. So anyway, me and Brian kind of parted ways.
You never paid him for Friday, did you?
No, I did. Well, I wasn't in charge of paying him anyway, but I knew they wasn't going to pay him. Why would they pay him? He didn't go.
What I'm hearing is Brian Lee, because I know a lot of people who like Brian Lee, talk warmly of him and everything, but it sounds like what you're saying is a classic case of his own worst enemy. I mean, he was the Undertaker's friend, and he couldn't do anything for him.
Right. But, no, Brian is a likable guy. I like him, traveled a lot with him, but he was undependable. You could put him in something, and I was there in Smoky Mountain, and he was okay then, but then I heard then he ended up no-showing them. That's why Cornette stopped using him. That's what I heard. I don't know.
Eric, hi, Dutch and James. Do you have any memories of Memphis Wrestling's forgotten manager of the mid-1980s, Tux Newman? Any information on Tux would be greatly appreciated.
I remember Tux. I think I was coming back from Puerto Rico, and I don't remember the timeline. And Tom Ernesto, my old mentor, was in there. And I think Tom had met Tux Newman in California. And I wasn't really impressed with, he wore a tuxedo to the ring. He was from LA or somewhere out there. And he was not well versed in Southern wrestling. And no stories about him. I may have had more stories about him had I hung around longer. But the territory was in not good shape. I wasn't making any money, so I left there and I forgot where I went. You
went Mid-Atlantic in 86. I know that.
I may have went there, but I think I went to Mid-South, I think.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You did go to Mid-South. Apparently, you managed the Pretty Young Things, Randy Savage, David Schultz, Mike Sharp, Eddie Gilbert, and Giant Frazier, who was, what's he called? In the WWF, Plowboy Frazier, there you go. But he was something else in WWF. And he eventually lost a loser leaves town match against Jerry Jarrett in the Louisville Gardens. He was only in there in 85, I think. Maybe that's it. He just came and went.
Yep. He wasn't there long. And one
Okay.
reason he wasn't there long, he probably couldn't afford to stay there because the territory was not doing good.
Our next question is from Jamie. Does Dutch have any good Raging Bull Manny Fernandez stories? Thanks for the entertainment.
Where did I hear this story on Raging Bull? He did a Brian Lee too. I think he went to Puerto Rico, and they usually bring somebody in on like a Friday, and so they make the Friday town Saturday. They go out on Monday. So they had showed these tapes on Manny Fernandez, and he came in and he did the same thing that Brian Lee did, because at the time you could go down to the drugstore and get all kind of like pain pills, because you didn't have to have a doctor write a prescription. You could just go in and you say, hey, give me some oxycodone. Okay, here, how many you want? And they wouldn't charge you like a drug dealer would charge you. He'd charge you like $10 a pill. Hell, you might pay there like 40 cents a pill, and they would just load up. So they brought him in there, and he was booked for the whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they didn't see him the whole weekend. He missed every shot. And finally, they went by his hotel and asked to check his room, and he was still in his room. He hadn't come out of his room, and he missed the whole weekend. And I guess they said, listen, can you stay this weekend and do what we wanted you to do last week? Oh, yeah, I can. He said, I was here. Knowing that now he may have been there, but they couldn't get him up to answer the door. So listen, if anybody has any kind of a substance problem, even today, I mean, they've tightened their drugstores up. Even today, Puerto Rico is the wrong place to send them. All you got to do is go to this parts of San Juan and at any street corner and pick up all you need. So I don't care what you need. If you have any kind of a substance problem or an addiction problem, don't go to Puerto Rico, because it'll get worse.
With Manny, I think he's got a reputation for heeling in on independent wrestling shows, or just turn up and demand that he be paid and put on the card. This was years ago. And the other thing is that he may be one of the purveyor of tall tales within the business. Do you remember anything? Manny Fernandez.
Oh, well, I remember some stories he told me. I cannot remember them now because I was only half listening to them. But Manny, again, very likable guy. You'll like him automatically. But when he would get drinking or under the influence of mind-altering substances, he got wild. And he's a pretty big guy, pretty rugged. And so you couldn't predict him, how he would act. So I would suggest that back in those days, and maybe not today, he may have calmed down, but back in those days, I would highly suggest somebody not go to a bar with him because he'd get in a fight, and you don't want to do that in Puerto Rico.
Well, more likely than carrying a knife than other places, you suggest.
Well, they had knives. I don't think he had one, but still, he would start something and carry through with it.
Next question. Chris Bedard, hopefully I've said your name right, Knoxville, Tennessee. What was Dutch's favorite angle in Smoky Mountain Wrestling? Amazingly simple question. I don't think that's ever come up.
Seriously, I think anything Cornette was in, I enjoyed most of them. But in Smoky Mountain, I think when I was there, Chris Candido was there. He was in some good stuff. The Rock and Roll was in some good stuff. And it had angles all spread all out through it. because Cornette would spend, sometimes we would do 3 or 4 tapes in a row in the same day, in the same taping. And they were all good. So I think
VA pharmacy or one other.
Shall I
one
pause?
second. No, they were just calling me.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of a big angle that I remember that jumped off the.
Well, were you in any particularly? Because you had quite a few matches throughout. I mean, I'm just looking at some.
Well,
I mean, Dixie Dynamite, Hector Guerrero. Hector Guerrero, I didn't realize wasn't Smokey. Danny Davis. Who else? Brian Lee, who we mentioned before a couple of times. I think your first match that I can find was in '91. Scott Armstrong. You wrestled as well. Who else did you wrestle?
Oh, I do remember the Scott Armstrong match. We was on a show. Now I'm out there every week on commentary. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And Cornette didn't put a lot of thought of this. He just told me to put over Scott Armstrong. And you know, after last show, he's saying, "Hey, that's my job." Well, I had been putting over everybody, but when I go out on commentary, you know, I suggested, well, instead of him beating me, why don't we just get a DQ? I still lose, but boy, Scott Armstrong, he didn't like that. So he came up to me. He says, well, hell, okay, Mr. High and Mighty. He got hot about it. He said, hell, why don't I just put you over? And the prevailing attitude was put your baby faces over, and you know, everybody leaves happy. I didn't have any problem with that, but I was doing the commentary every week, and I said, at least give me some kind of a, so I just don't get pinned. And Cornette, I told Cornette, he said, okay, just get a DQ, and he walked off. Well, Scott, he didn't like that. He wanted to win the match, but anyway, we did what he said, but Scott didn't much like it.
I'm going to blame. Well, that might have been later. I don't know. But the first match you ever had was on the second ever episode of Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV. Scott Armstrong defeats Dutch Mantell, disqualification in 4 minutes 45. The Brian Lee match, you beat Brian Lee by DQ. That was SMW TV. Is that 3 or 8? Where's my glasses? 3. There you go.
And Smoky Mountain 3.
Yeah, the third episode. So you were in the ring pretty early on.
Yeah, but it was very hard to actually work in the ring and do commentary at the same time. Did I do commentary on that show too?
Oh, goodness knows, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'd have to find out. Okay, next question. Tom says, hello, Dutch and James. I'm loving your show. Very entertaining and informative. I'm just wondering who your favourite workers to book for were. Who you knew you could get what you needed from them without any hassle.
Well, let's go with, say, Memphis. Almost anybody that was there, you know, they'd turn in a hell of a match, with no doubt. Now, whatever you gave them, they would try their utmost to carry it out. One of my favorite territories was Continental, and that was with the Fuller's territory, because everybody there could work. Everybody was happy to work. Nobody was bitching, moaning, carrying on. I was paid pretty good. I don't know how the other guys are paid, but I was paid pretty good. That's what I liked about working with Ron Fuller. He'd pay you. So, and I was with the stud stable then with Robert Fuller, Jimmy Golden, and me. And then we ended up later on going to Knoxville with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and we did the same thing there. So Robert, he was probably the most entertaining in interviews. What is wrong with this thing?
I think the camera just died.
Huh?
It's not that the camera just decides to just like disappear sometimes. It's that it then immediately stops working and like stops following you.
Well, I think it stopped right now.
Well, when you were a booker, who could you just rely on as far as no matter what you suggested to them, they would just go, no problem, I'll do my best. They were game for anything. He was just easy to tell.
Most of them, really. Let's say Brad Armstrong. He would go out there, and I love Brad. Whether he was winning or losing, he gave you the same effort every time out. Tom Pritchard, same way. He gave you the same energy, whether he was winning or losing. And I tried to do that too, whether I was winning or losing, I'd give the same effort. Because if I'm going in the ring with him and he's good and they want to put him over, I had no problem with it. Let's do it, but let's have a good match. Now, this is a thing I did, especially when I was almost losing every match. The guy would win, people be happy, and then I'd stand in the ring, and then all of a sudden I went into my depressed period. I'd go, oh God. And I'd just lay my head on the top of the turnbuckle and go, God. And I was just so upset. Then I would go to the center of the ring and what we call hissy fits, where I would kick my feet up there and just hit the mat like a kid just having a screaming fit. And so when the match was over, what did they remember more? Me losing or me pitching the fit? And they remember that. So I guess that was part of my character development, but I got a rise out of them, and it took away if I just left the ring, well, hell, I just left the ring like a beat down dog. But when I pitched the fit, they remembered that.
Ahmed says, regarding mental health in wrestling, how did Dutch manage to get through 50 years of his wrestling career mentally? This must have been a lot on him. What did he do to be strong mentally through all this?
Seriously, to put up with the amount of bullshit that I had to put up with and listen to all these things I had to listen to, while it may be entertaining, it is not the best thing for mental health. It is not. You're around guys that are drinking. This is years ago, drinking, taking drugs, going into the ring, knowing that the guy is drinking, taking drugs, knowing that, you could get hurt in these matches. And sometimes you were going 7 days a week. And in Mid-South, you had double headers Saturday and Sunday during the summer months. You're spending all your time on the road and all your time in the ring. So, yeah, it's very, very difficult to concentrate on what you're trying to do. And that's why guys took drugs. That's why guys drank so much. Because hell, they were just worn out. And that's why I told you this, the last show we did, I went to London, but I didn't get to see anything because I was too worn out from traveling. You fly from the US to the UK is about 6, 7, 8 hours or whatever it is. By the time you get there, you would just want to go to sleep. Give me a place to crash. And then by the time they threw you on the bus and let's go to the town, let's get back. And it's the same. The longest place I've ever been, trip wise, was Mid-South. You would sometimes go from Louisiana, where I based out of, all the way to Oklahoma, which is about 400 miles. But you'd go up there and you do a weekend. You do a Saturday night town, then a doubleheader Sunday, and drive back 400 miles in the dark. And everybody in Louisiana had one headlight and the roads were 2 lanes. They didn't I don't even think they've heard about interstates where I was. So it wasn't easy traveling. And sometimes I'd make the trip by myself. So damn what I'm saying is not only mental health. I don't know why more wrestlers didn't get killed in car accidents.
Did you ever struggle to sleep? You get back to where you. I mean, was like insomnia a problem for you over the years?
No. Because what you do in those territories, you'd sleep when you could. Sometimes you be in the car between the bullshit stories and the guy smoking a joint and the guy taking a pill, or drinking a beer. I try to sleep, but sometimes I didn't trust the guy driving, so I'd have to stay awake. Yeah, it was not only physically but mentally. So, but I was pretty good at blocking things out, or I would never gotten through it.
Did you ever feel at any point, you've been on the road for so many years, did you ever feel like itchy feet when you finally got back home for a while that you just couldn't wait to get back on the road, or was it easy for you to stay home and not want to get back on into the grind?
It was easy for me to stay home. I wanted to stay home, but I couldn't because, that's you got paid to make these trips. And it's okay when you're a younger guy. When you get older, and I've seen older guys, I said, I don't really want to be in that condition. But in the 90s, when that downturn really happened, all the places went out of business. It was very, very hard to make a living. It really was. So, and I went through that, as most of the wrestlers who weren't in WCW or WWF went through. Well, I think that is my cigar.
It's following your cigar. Okay, while you adjust the camera, were there any wrestlers who showed a lot of promise that you spent any time with, and they just couldn't hack the road schedule? They couldn't hack being on the road for that long, that you thought they had real promise and it just didn't work out because it was just too tough, the grind?
Oh, a lot of them had the ability. Had they been trained, they couldn't take the traveling. They just couldn't handle that. Some guys can do it, some guys can't. Some guys that have that wandering lust or the wandering in their eye, they wanted to do it. The young guys, but after a while, the luster wears actually off the business. I came along at a good time. It was like, I call it the golden years between the late 70s and before 85. And I think Vince started in business around 83, 82. And that's when all the little territories started drawing up and your attendance went down. And because you could watch WWE, who would go to a little freak show when the circus is in town?
Next question. Bagzad says, hello, Mr. Mantell. I hope this message finds you well. I have a question regarding William Regal, probably my favourite wrestler ever. Despite his significant contributions to the wrestling world and his esteemed career, William Regal has not been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Given your extensive experience and knowledge in wrestling, I would love to hear your thoughts on why Regal might still be absent from the Hall of Fame, and do you agree he should have been there by now? Best regards. I'm sort of thinking, well, give him time. He's a shoo-in, isn't he?
Yeah. I would think he would be. Listen, one thing you gotta realize about the Hall of Fame, it's political, very political. So, and people ask me, why aren't you in the Hall of Fame? I don't know. There's no specific reason, but before it was all Vince. I don't know what criteria they're going to use. Do you like that word, criteria? What kind of criteria they're going to use for it now? But hey, they put that comedian in.
Drew Carey.
They put him in, and he did one pay-per-view, but they put him in anyway. But does he deserve to be in there? No.
Chris Von Erich, Stacy Keibler, Tori Wilson.
Yeah, they put him in there, and they actually contributed basically nothing. I mean, people knew who they were, but it's very political, and I don't play the political game that well. And that's how guys used to get booked in all these territories. I think, well, he's not that good. But guess who liked him? The people in charge. He was smarter than I was, and I didn't drink that much. So where you made your connections with these people in power in wrestling is at the bars after the matches. And that's when you'd get in there and you start drinking with them and laughing with them. And you become a friend, kind of, or a pal, or tag along. So when the guy went somewhere else, wanted to be a book, you'd call him up. He knew you, he liked you, and he said, okay. And he considered you, or say if I was the guy, he would consider me a friend and bring me in. But the wrestling business is just like any other business. It's who you know and who likes you, and more than talent. I've seen a lot of guys with a lot of talent, but somehow they just turn people off, and not many of the people in power like them. Say Barry Horowitz. He doesn't drink, period. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't do anything that could possibly hurt his health. And
why was he in the business then?
Yeah, I said, how did you even get in? I asked him that one time. He said, I don't know, lucky, I guess. but when he went to, and I will say one thing, WWF watched my loser, Barry, I guess.
No, it was Jack Hart. Name? Jack Hart.
Oh, Jack Hart. That was his, I think that was his real name, to tell you the truth. I don't know. But they lost the loser gimmick and took it up there and redid it with Barry Horowitz. So, see, WWE didn't want to, or WWF didn't want to acknowledge any other wrestling promotions except they would steal from you. And guess what? I got out of that.
Nothing.
Big fat zero.
Yeah, the WWE Hall of Fame. If nothing else, it'd be interesting to see, because they don't do the legacy inductions anymore, I don't think, anyway. As you know, we talked last week about Brickhouse Brown getting in. And I'm trying to think. I'd be interested to see who gets in this following year. John Cena, maybe, I don't know, or the year after. You?
Hey, they mentioned my name.
They did?
Yeah, on NXT.
Oh, they did. No, they did.
They sang the song, so, hey, I got a shot. But all I'm interested in is, hey, how much money does it mean for me? I mean, just getting in there just to say you're in there, that's like saying, we won the high school state championship back in '58. Well, hell, nobody gives a crap about that. You know, it's what, give me some money and then we'll talk about it.
Next question. Samuel T. White, Walhalla, South Carolina. Dutch.
Hey, that's my hometown.
Is it really?
Yeah. You didn't know that?
I thought you were born in North Carolina for some reason.
James.
I'm not your biographer, in fairness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why he put Walhalla, because he knows I'm from Walhalla.
Oh, there you go then.
So, and I left that town years ago, and I have been back maybe all these years, maybe 4 times.
So no one told
I left that
really.
town. No, I put it in my rearview mirror, and I left. It was a nice town, I guess, but I didn't much like it. I didn't even like growing up there.
Well, there you go. So Dutch has talked crap about your hometown, Samuel. Here's the question. Dutch, who was Jack Curtis during the Continental years? He acts like he's a commissioner of some type, but to be honest, he was bad on camera, although not nearly as awful as Ron West. Did he work for Fuller initially and was let go when David Woods bought the promotion? Was your loser leave town angle, he didn't write the town bit, with Robert Fuller done because you wanted to leave or because Woods was bringing in hot stuff Eddie Gilbert as the new booker? And no, I am not still married to your cousin Flossie May.
I don't know where that comes from.
No. Okay, then. So first off, who is Jack Curtis?
Jack Curtis is related to the Curtis family, I guess, in lower Mississippi. I think they used to promote some of the towns down there like Gulfport and Hattiesburg or something. He's from a wrestling family. And I never liked Jack Curtis. Jack Curtis came in, and I don't know how he got in touch with David Woods, who bought out the Fullers, because the Fullers were looking to get rid of it anyway. And he bought it because he owned the TV station in Montgomery, Alabama. And he was in there about 3 weeks, and they just finished me up. I've never been mad about that happening, but it came out of the blue, and it's because Jack just didn't like me. Everything's political, remember. And so when he finished me up, I felt like punching him, but I didn't. I went ahead and finished up and kept my temper to myself because it wasn't going to fix anything. It just pissed me off. So, and he was a nobody. He didn't know how to promote. He thought he did, but he didn't. Just because you come from the wrestling family, that don't mean nothing. So anyway, he was just a nobody.
So he only promoted a certain town then, and that was it.
Well, he was like, he got in with David Woods, so he became like the acting manager of the territory. And very few guys liked him because he had a very abrasive attitude. And
but he wasn't the booker then, so Eddie Gilbert was the booker.
Eddie Gilbert was the booker, and Eddie came in, and it lasted about 6 months with Eddie. And then him and Jack got into it again, I guess. And he quit there. And then soon after that, David Woods went out of business. Mm-hmm. So he spent all this money buying out Ron Fuller. And then he ended up losing all that money because his company went out of business.
Next question. Paul from, I'm going to blow this name, I'll tell you, Mississauga. How do I spell it? Say it?
That's close enough. I don't know how you say it.
Okay, fine. Why do WWE employees, or anyone, I guess, feed Dave Meltzer and Sean Ross Sapp and others information? Do they get paid? If not, what's the point of telling Dave what's planned for the months ahead? So, yeah, why do people talk to the inside dirt sheet writers?
Well, they say they talking to them, but do we know they're talking to them? No, because if at one time, if you were caught talking to one of them, they'd fire you because they didn't want that. I think it was more prevalent back in years gone by than it is now. And Meltzer, I've tried to read Meltzer. Meltzer I think he was before the major media guys. They would report the news. Meltzer not only reported the news or what he thought was going to be the news, but he put his opinion in it too. So when you read Meltzer, you're reading what he thinks is going to happen. It's like listening to the podcast. Hell, we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody's telling us. So we can say anything, whether it happens or not, we don't know. But Meltzer, he just found something that he could probably make a few dollars at, turned it into actually a pretty thriving business, because when he used to he would print those papers out, not on a printer. What is it called? Mimeograph? What's it called?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he just print them all out, and he'd do it by hand, and he would mail them all out. It's like $2 a week. So if he mailed out 500 copies of it, he'd make a pretty good little payday for the week.
But that, may be the case, obviously. But I know for a fact that Bruiser Brody used to talk to Dave Meltzer all the time. Yep. Terry Funk did. Eddie Gilbert, Paul Heyman,
mm-hmm.
Steve Austin, I believe, does. I don't know if he'd ever admit it. Who else am I thinking of? Ric Flair did for a long time. Bret Hart did, later on in his career. Lots of people talk to Dave, and I'm using Dave as an example because he's the longest tenured, if I can say it that way. So what gravitates, quite frankly, a lot of the biggest stars in the industry to reveal information to outsiders for their newsletters? What's the motivation?
Well, to get covered positively. And see, Brody, he had a reason. This is Brody's reason. He wanted the Japanese promoters to read the paper, and they would read it. And when they'd hear, they're offering him big money, well, that increased his standing with the Japanese promoters, because they're thinking that, well, if we don't get him here and pay him, that he'll just stay over there. And he was a big draw in Japan. So he made a living for a number of years just making Japan, like once every couple of months. He would come in for a week or a weekend, and then he'd leave. He'd be gone a month or 6 weeks, and then he'd come back in. So him and Stan Hansen basically used Japan as their primary source of income because of the dirt sheets, because Brody would tell his side of the story before the other dirt sheets said this, that, or the other. He'd give Meltzer the exclusive on it, and Eddie Gilbert would do it. And I've told the story about Eddie, right? He would say, he would call up Meltzer and tell him that, well, he talked to Vince McMahon. And then so Meltzer would write, hey, Vince, Eddie Gilbert could be going to WWE or WWF and be on the booking team.
I'll give you another one. He used to, a couple of different times, he was in contact for prolonged periods of time with Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff back in the 90s he used to talk to. He talked to everyone at the time. So why would Bill Watts talk to him? What's in it?
Well,
I mean, yeah.
Watts talked to him Watts hated him.
Oh, really?
I mean, no, most of the guys in the business hated the writers because they would write contrary to what they was trying to put out. And a lot of them, like Bill Watts, I think would call up and set the record straight. And he wouldn't tell anybody that he had talked to him. But yeah, I mean, Meltzer was very influential in the wrestling business at one time till I think it went to his head. And now he's got a lot of people that nobody believes Meltzer anymore. Because now I heard up, he was on, I read that Tony Khan put him on payroll.
Yeah,
did you hear that?
Yeah, it's a theory that I don't believe, but
he could.
Weirder things have happened.
He could, just to get covered positively. Because if he leaves it, Tony, to guys like me and you, well, what do we do to Tony and AEW? We just say what's wrong with it. We don't necessarily knock them so much. We're telling the truth, the way he needs to do this. And a lot of people write that, we put over WWE, but we just trash AEW. And there's a reason for that, because there's so much difference between AEW programming and WWE programming. It's like night and day, and I don't think you need to be, you just look at it without being a wrestling fan and tell which one is the better show.
We're going to end on this question. Dustin from Anderson, Indiana. Hi, Dutch and James. A few years ago, I went to a comedy show with Mick Foley that he did in Muncie, Indiana. He was talking about older wrestling stories and mentioned wrestlers putting toilet paper in their bums when picked up and squeezed on so they didn't poo their pants. He mentioned Dusty Rhodes doing it. It was this a real thing when picked up in moves like bear hugs, etc., that they were pushing hard on your stomach. Was this not the muffler, the famous muffler that Dusty Rhodes used to call it back in the day?
I never heard that, putting it in back there. I've heard of guys actually messing on themselves in the ring, and they may have wished they had put something back there. What I'm more familiar with is them taking it and putting it in front to make their little wing wangs look a little bigger, because what wrestling is just men's burlesque is all it is. So, because the women used to tell me, hey, guys could go to strip shows. What did we have? We had wrestling. So we could go to wrestling and see half naked men. So a guy out there, so he would put it right there in front of his little wing wang, so he looked like he'd have a big one. And a couple of guys, I swear to God, they did have big ones. Robert Fuller, it was like a damn elephant trunk, believe me. He asked me one day, Dutch, don't you wish you had one this big? And I remember what I told him. I said, well, Robert, I'll tell you the truth. I wouldn't want nobody to know my wife had a vagina that big. And I laughed real big. He didn't think it was too funny, but that's my experience with toilet paper in the dressing room.
I know with Robert Gibson, I'm going to ask you another question in a minute. Robert Gibson, he may have even told me, and he just went, how do I make my dick 10 inches? Fold it in half.
Yeah. Oh, he had a big tool too. And when a guy can stand in front of you, now this might be a little X-rated people. When he can stand in front of you and swing it around, he's kind of talented. Believe me.
Wrestling's really gay, isn't it?
Well, you see all kind of stuff in the dressing room. But Robert wasn't gay and Robert wasn't gay. But if they wanted to be gay and wanted to maybe charge for it, yeah, they could probably make a lot of money.
Okay, you were saying beforehand the occasional wrestler used to stuff the front of their trunks. Dutch, we need names. Who did it? You. I know you've got a name in mind. Not you. You.
I think Lawler did it.
Huh?
I think Ricky Morton did it.
If he's hanging around Robert Gibson all the time, then.
I think he did it. And maybe one of the fabulous ones. I don't think they were obstinate about it. I think, you just stick it in there. But I didn't watch usually guys get dressed. But seeing them naked in the shower, you would know what they got. So it looked a little bigger than what they had. So.
The joys of the gentleman's locker room. We're going to end it there. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening.
Now, hey, you don't hear that story everywhere. I mean, you just can't walk down the street and hear a story like that. You got to come here to hear it.
Hey, well, you certainly can if you download our audio podcast, available on all podcast platforms. You can go anywhere you want and listen to that story if you wish. But for now, thank you, everybody, for watching.
If anybody wants to contact me about books or about any merchandise or have any questions, contact me, Dirty Dutch Mantell at gmail.com. And I'm working on my website, dirtydutchmantell.com. You can get it over there. And I have some stories over there, and I'm going to start adding to that. So check it out and check out my merchandise store and let me know what you need, and I'll get back to you.
Well, I'm going to close out the show. We'll see you again on Friday because I'm off to the pub now. It's a nice day. So, Dutch, we will see you all again on Friday for story time. We, the people.